Welcome back to my channel. Today is Monday, July 31st, 2023, and we're officially counting down. Sister Wives hits again on August 20th of this year, and as we're starting to realize, this family isn't just fractured, it's literally coming apart at the seams. Over the last couple of months, let's say since season 17, a lot has come to light. Much of what we have watched unfold on television doesn't hold up to a modicum of scrutiny. Scenes feel very staged, others reenacted, and when you start lining things up, there are holes in the storylines to which we were sold. What once looked like reality TV is starting to feel a lot more like damage control, cleverly managed. Lately, there's been a surge of headlines in regards to Kate Gosselin and John Gosselin and their long, bitter custody battle. A major issue in that fight has been filming, more so if the kids wanted to be on camera at all. Now their son Colin Gosselin has come forward and said straightforwardly, "I didn't want to film." According to Colin, his refusal had consequences. He claims he was sent away and labeled as a problem child, with behavioral issues that were directly tied to the pressure of filming and what was happening behind closed doors in his home. And this is where things start to sound uncomfortably familiar. The Brown family didn't send their children away to a facility, but they did force an adoption, and looking closely, the parallels are hard to avoid. What happened between John Gosselin and Kate shares striking similarities with what transpired between Robyn Brown and her ex-husband Preston. I've seen court records and text messages, documents she herself filed as evidence in an effort to take away custody of kids from Preston. These records aren't a matter of one side of a legal story, but are actually a much deeper look into what really happened with Dayton and how a serious accident was later used as leverage. Here's where your stomach does the flips. It was not Preston who caused the accident Dayton was involved in. In truth, it reportedly happened while Dayton was with Kody. The medical bills followed, which at first Kody would not pay. Then, a surprise deal was on the table, in which Kody would pay the costs, but only if Preston agreed to give up custody. Let it sink into your head for a minute. That's not concern. That's not generosity. That's manipulation, plain and simple. And to be frank, it is tough not to call that exactly what it is: disturbing. What makes this even more troubling is knowing that at the exact same time, the Browns were pushing a shiny, emotional narrative across national television. This adoption, they seem to say, was about love, selflessness, all for the kids. But when you look behind the curtain, it feels very different. But there was one story being peddled, one meant to pull at heartstrings, but the truth, folded within the legal filings and privates, tells one much darker. This storyline wasn't just emotional, but it was very profitable. The arc of adoption became a part of the show itself, meaning TLC paid for it as a featured storyline. That itself created a strong incentive for everything to unfold in the way working in TLC's favor, meaning the kids stayed on the show and were legally adopted by Kody. Take the sentiment out, and it really comes full circle to two things: money and filming.
Okay, now that I have said that, on with today's topic. But before we do, a quick favor from me to you. If you like this discussion and if this is an eye-opening discussion, do give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, now is a good time. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button below. And hey, don't forget to click the bell so you're notified when I go live or when I upload. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment if you have something to say. Feel free to share this video with those of your friends who follow my show. Now, let's go back to Season 8, Episode 1. That is when we heard the story about Dayton, who, at the time, was legally Dayton David Jessup, and then took on the name Dayton Brown after the adoption. Robyn explained that Dayton had been in a terrible ATV accident. She said he was out of town with friends when it happened, and that the injuries were serious enough that he had to be hospitalized and undergo several medical procedures. Later, he even had to have another surgery to fix his eyelid. It was a very long and painful process, and the show wasn't stingy with making sure viewers knew how much he'd been through. According to Robyn, this accident happened while Dayton was away from home visiting friends. That detail led many viewers to assume something specific, that Dayton had been in Montana visiting his biological father when the accident occurred. Over the years, that assumption stuck. The people came to believe the accident happened on Preston's watch, and as a result, Robyn was often portrayed as the long-suffering, heroic mom stepping in to handle the fallout. But here's where things get unstuck. Last year, I contacted the office of the Clark County Clerk in Las Vegas and obtained a copy of the lien placed on Robyn's home back in 2013. This document is important because it directly relates to what really happened. The lien names David Jessup, Dayton's legal name at the time, because this was before the adoption, and the timing matters too. The accident did not happen after the adoption. It happened in 2012. That one piece of paperwork raises serious questions about the story we were told and where Dayton actually was when that ATV accident occurred. Let me clear this up step by step, because that is what the details require. Dayton's name on his birth certificate was David Jessup. Records show he was admitted in the hospital on November 22, 2012, and discharged on November 24, 2012. And here's the significant part. He was discharged in Las Vegas. That one detail speaks volumes. This was a serious emergency. With injuries this severe, doctors don't wait around or transfer patients across state lines. They take them to the nearest hospital immediately. That means Dayton was not out of town when the accident happened. He was in Las Vegas at the time. Due to the medical expenses amounting to over $31,000, a lien was attached to Robyn's home. She paid it ultimately. The reason was as simple as it gets. She did not have proper insurance coverage for Dayton at the time. Now consider what we were led to believe on the show. It was mentioned numerous times that Dayton was out of town at the time of the accident. Well, these records certainly prove that to be wrong. He was physically in Las Vegas, so the long-standing fan theory that this occurred in Montana while he was visiting his dad just doesn't hold up. Montana, specifically Pinesdale, is hours and hours away. Given the severity of Dayton's injuries, there's no scenario in which they would delay care or transport him that far instead of taking him to a nearby hospital.
And there's more. Text messages that Robyn herself sent to Preston show that he had no idea this accident had even happened. He only learned bits and pieces later, and he tried to get information directly from Dayton when Dayton visited him in December of 2012. That alone would contradict the idea that Preston was in some way present, involved, or responsible. Fast forward to 2015, Robyn filed a motion to terminate Preston's custody rights altogether. She made the argument in court that he was behind in child support, owed her money, wasn't seeing the kids, and the kids didn't want to live with him or even see him anymore, leaning heavily on how much of a terrible person he was in front of this judge, stacking claim after claim. I got these court records some months ago. Until now, I have not gone deeply into this side of the story. Early on, when we first started talking about the adoption, the focus was elsewhere. But once you see these documents and line them up with what aired on television, it's impossible to ignore the contradictions. And this is where the plot really begins to break. If you go back to the divorce itself, a big part of it centered around Robyn's debt. The custody situation that followed was chaotic, to say the least. And right in the middle of that mess, a very convenient storyline began to take shape, one that TLC could easily build an entire season around. The message was clear and dramatic. Kody needs to adopt the kids. Robyn's ex-husband is the bad guy. He is painted as the bad guy who took her purity, neglected his children, didn't pay child support, didn't want to see his kids, and wasn't even liked by them. It was a clean, easy narrative, and it fit perfectly into a television storyline. But when Robyn went to court to have Preston's custody suspended or terminated, the evidence she submitted tells a very different story. Among the documents were text messages exchanged between Robyn and Preston. These messages were presented as proof that Preston was difficult, unreliable, or in some way a bad influence on the children's welfare, either by changing plans, being uncooperative, or behaving in ways she claimed were deleterious to the kids. It was one exchange in particular. It took place in late November to early December of 2012, right before the children were set to visit Preston for the holidays. Keep in mind, Dayton had just been hospitalized in November on account of the ATV accident, and this visit was coming shortly after that. In a message sent right before the custody exchange, Robyn wrote to Preston, "I really need him to be positive with Dayton. He's just now starting to heal, and his mind needs to be in a hopeful, strong place." She asked Preston and his family to reinforce that message, to help Dayton see his scars as something he could move past, even something that showed strength, rather than letting them become a source of pain or shame. She said everyone around Dayton was telling him how cool and tough his scars would look, and wanted the same kind of encouragement to come from Preston and his side of the family. Her message ended simply with, "Please help make sure this doesn't become a stumbling block for him." How did Preston respond? Easy and affable. Sounds good. At that time, Preston was supposed to have the children up until December 30th, and by all accounts and messages, he did have the kids at that time. The whole thing was rather routine. No fight, no drama, no denial. Which also raises the question, if this exchange was meant to prove he was uncooperative or harmful, where exactly is the problem? Everything is okay. The custody exchange was on schedule, and the children were returned on the 29th without incident. But within a half hour after Robyn picked them up, she sent Preston a message, and this is where the tone abruptly changes. In that message, Robyn accused Preston of upsetting the kids. She said she couldn't believe how upset they were when she picked them up, and claimed that he had dragged them into adult issues. According to her, that behavior was emotionally unhealthy for them. She went on to say that if Preston needed any information about Dayton's accident, he should have asked her, not Dayton. She accused him of never calling or checking in, and claimed that Dayton said Preston had cornered him and twisted his words. She also said Aurora had felt the same way. Robyn told him that this was a direct violation of the parenting plan, and that he knew full well that the children were not to be discussed in adult matters.
She threatened that if he continued down this path, she would go back in front of a judge and have it enforced by the court. And another pointed statement it was. Robyn told Preston that the kids were tired of him pressuring them to live with him, adding that it didn't matter anyway because a judge would never justify it. Now, let's pause there for a moment. On the show, Robyn had constantly mentioned that Preston never wanted to see the kids, that he wasn't interested, that he was absent, but here, in her own words, she's telling him to stop pressuring the kids to live with him. Those two don't exactly line up. She's also angry with him for asking his own son a very basic, very human question. What happened in your accident? That's not an interrogation. That's a father trying to understand what his child went through. Still, if Preston asks Dayton directly, there's always the chance that he may hear the unfiltered truth. If he asks Robyn, he may only get a carefully managed version of events, one that protects certain people or preserves a particular narrative. And here is where things get even more interesting. I spoke with a source close to Preston who revealed that Dayton was in fact with Kody at the time of the accident, and that detail changes everything. Here's where it gets even messier. According to my source, Dayton had very little experience with ATVs when this all happened. He had never driven one before and, unfortunately, drove it straight into a barbed wire fence. The result? He was seriously injured. Kody was allegedly there when it happened. To any father, Preston's instinct to ask, "What happened? Who was with you? Are you okay?" makes perfect sense. Dayton was a teenager at the time, old enough really to answer some basic questions, but obviously young enough to need guidance and protection from a parent. And yet, Robyn threatened court action if Preston didn't follow her rules. She indicated she would go to the judge if her instructions weren't followed, making a very confrontational situation out of what should have been simple parenting communication.
Another pattern that emerges upon reviewing text messages between them is the frequency at which Preston tries to reach out to his kids, and Robyn repeatedly blocks him, usually on the pretense of filming. For instance, on August 19, 2012, Preston attempted to call. Robyn texted back, "We are filming right now. They can't take your call. We're busy all week at Disney and other activities. Can I call you next week?" In other words, his attempts to speak with his own children were delayed because of production schedules. Then he phoned again on August 26th. She responded, "I'm working. Kids aren't with me. I would like to set up another time to talk." This pattern continued by November 4th with another call from Preston to which Robyn responded, by text, that they were again in the middle of filming. It's a clear pattern. Every time Preston tried to reach out, filming was the reason he couldn't connect with his children. It raises questions about whether the children's access to their father was truly restricted for practical reasons, or if it was being controlled to fit a television narrative. By November 2012, this pattern of restricted communication had continued. On 4 November, she reports to Preston that they're on set and can't take his call, but asks if he wants to try calling tomorrow. Then on 11 November, he contacts her about Christmas presents, still no direct contact. Fast forward to November 22nd, the day of Dayton's accident, the messages take a dramatic turn. Robyn texts Preston, "I need to call you in a little bit. My phone is dying. I'm going to call you from Kody's phone. It's an 801 area code." Preston responds, asking if now is a bad time and suggesting they talk tomorrow. Robyn insists, "No, it's an emergency." This clearly proves that Preston was not at the scene of the accident. She was calling him, and notably from Kody's phone. Through all of this, they were also continuing custody discussions. The plan was that Preston would be meeting the kids on December 22nd, 2012, and take care of them through December 30th. For months, he tried to arrange communication and visitation, but every time he reached out, Robyn would cite filming as the reason he couldn't speak with the kids. Meanwhile, she was filing petitions claiming that Preston didn't want to see the children. Yet when he actually did see them after the accident, he asked if they wanted to live with him. Robyn's response, that he was pressuring them. Here's the kicker. Preston eventually learned that the accident had happened while Dayton was with Kody. Because Dayton has Asperger's syndrome, or autism, Preston felt Kody should have been responsible. Dayton was inexperienced on an ATV, and Kody should have been monitoring him present. In Preston's mind, the medical bill should have been Kody's responsibility, not his. This information cast a whole different perspective on the story of the custody battle that was portrayed on the television show. Here's where the financial side of the story adds another level of complexity. In spite of this deficit of authority in the Robyn and Kody had been having on-again, off-again disputes with Preston regarding the support he was supposed to pay the children. Robyn and Kody had been earning much more than he had. There was even a point when Robyn had put the entire case on hold through the state. She had closed the whole case because at the point in time she was on food stamps. Between 2013 and 2015, Preston received numerous letters from his attorneys requesting money, explaining that he had to send it in order to see his children. However, when one looks deeper into the details, the reality is much more complex. Take, for example, November 19, 2012, only 3 days prior to Dayton's accident. Under Montana state records, it was shown that Preston was no longer obliged to pay child support. The notice clearly indicated that the Child Support Enforcement Division ceased acting as a child support service enforcer regarding his current duties, as well as revoked his prior assignment to pay child support, all effective November 19, 2012. The notice was officially signed on November 23, a day after Dayton's accident. This implies that it was at the same time as Dayton's accident that Preston was excused from paying support by state law. It could be said that in his perspective, there was no need for him to compensate either for support or medicals because the case was concluded. Yet, despite all that, Robyn and her team returned, demanding payment for medical expenses and everything else. This dispute, as well as the timing of the accident, is exactly what leads to a lot of the drama that follows. It also illustrates just how complex a television story was being told compared to what really occurred. By early January 2013, legal pressure was building. By February 2nd, Preston was already battling to access his children, fighting back against Robyn's impact in the show. This was when the storyline was actually shooting, and when Robyn was speaking adversely to Preston in media. In the show, she even went to the extent of saying that Preston had taken away her purity, which was quite definite. On the other hand, the storyline being presented on the television showed meeting the needs of the children. The kids needed to live with Robyn and Kody. The kids wanted Kody to be their dad. Based on the petition filed by Robyn, a drastic change occurred with Preston in 2013. When Robyn's episode aired on August 25, 2013, in which she accused Preston of abuse, she had been depicting Preston as an abuser in front of the children for 6 seasons before that. However, according to court files, in 2013, there was no visitation between Robyn and Preston for spring break and summer visitation. They visited Idaho Falls instead and left their 3 children with Preston for 2 weeks, with no request for further visitation by this summer. Then came nothing from Preston until January 2014. To her dismay, when Preston did make contact, Robyn was angry. Preston told her that he had been in Guatemala and could not phone. He further told her that he was in no legal obligation to let her and the children know about his whereabouts, in addition to the fact that there might be a possibility that he could relocate to Guatemala. This confrontation illustrates the central paradox: Robyn's story about having a dominating and absent father as opposed to Preston's claims of parental rights and autonomy. Issues between the show's representation and legal actions are growing further and further apart.
At this stage, the position that Preston has taken is fairly straightforward. He had maintained that he had no further obligation to make any child support payments or any medical expenses because the state had closed the case in the enforcement action. Technically, he was right, and so he had ceased all communication with Robyn from the summer of 2013 until January 2014. There were other things he might have been considering as well, though, and one of these would have been moving away to another country. And if one looks back at the situation, it is rather understandable that he would want out. This is because he is being accused of sexual abuse and domestic violence by Robyn on national television, and yet he still owes her money according to the claims she is making to the court system. In this way, a disturbing portrait of manipulation is revealed. Robyn's behavior in the courtroom, in combination with her story on the reality TV show, was not only strategic but also alienating and destructive. Such a context ensured that normal communication was made impossible. Even courtroom documents indicate how Preston communicated this frustration. During visits with the children, he complained to them about Robyn in very derogatory ways, listing her in his phone under reality blank. Family members were allegedly the same way. But it wasn't just verbal attacks. They pointed out what they could not afford during visits with him, stating things like, too expensive. But this is all related to the context of the reality show. Meanwhile, within the show itself, Kody was indulging these kids like crazy, Disney trips and all that. Preston's reality seemed much more disciplined and down-to-earth by comparison, but what was depicted in the media was the reverse. Preston was accused of physical abuse and sexual misconduct that had no grounds, while Kody was depicted as the caring father. It is not difficult to imagine just how frustrating the situation would be to Preston, causing him to question how he is even able to keep a relationship with his kids in the midst of this media storm. This is where it all begins to come together. Preston had a perspective of his own, one that tends to be obscured when you're listening to only the voice of Robyn. So, according to court documents, attorneys contacted Preston on February 2, 2015, and asked if he would willingly relinquish his parental rights. Think about this for a moment. 3 years had elapsed. In this period of time, Preston believed he didn't have to pay child support because of the closed case of enforcement by Robyn. Her lawyers had been sending threatening letters to him about not letting him see the kids until he paid up. Meanwhile, he had been vilified on national television for domestic violence and sexual abuse, with no concrete evidence of either charge being true. Next, he was being asked to pay for the medical expenses associated with the ATV incident, which he didn't take responsibility for because it apparently occurred when Kody was monitoring him in Dayton. Preston felt that if it was properly supervised, the incident would have been avoided, and the responsible one would be Kody. But he was being asked to share the expense. And so after all the years of frustration, the lawyers are now asking him just to waive his rights.
Preston did not give up so easily. He still had doubts about the medical bills and continued to insist that Kody was responsible for what transpired.
Although he may have had a case to sue himself for some of them, morally and rationally it was different. However, amidst all these, it should be noted that correspondence between Robyn and Kody also appeared to put a rational spin on the events. We don't ever want to exclude him from his children's lives, and if Kody and his children choose to, we would certainly go along with the schedule that allows visits to take place, Robyn and Kody stated. Our only desire is to act as a resource to these children, and we firmly believe that it is in these children's best interest that Kody should adopt them. It's just that there's so much on the line here, so much that could potentially rip our family apart if things don't work out the way that we want them to, he says. And it's really difficult, you know? It's hard. That's where this scenario gets really messy. It became clear that Kody and his partners had told Preston that, while it might be possible that he could still see his children, it could not become a legal reality. In other words, we'll let you visit, but we can't guarantee it. The key point is that all these children had a strong affection for Kody, as well as his family, and wanted to be adopted by Kody. But the financial aspect of the case was an important part of the presentation. Preston owed more than $30,000 for medications and approximately $5,000 for child support over the course of 30 months. Kody proposed that he would pay these off if Preston would grant him their children so that there would not be the need for legal action. The lawyers went so far as to draft a letter to Preston that stated that if Preston agreed to the arrangement, the lawyers would sign the relinquishment of rights to the children before a notary public. Moreover, a twist of jurisdiction occurred. The matter had to be moved from Montana to Nevada in order for Kody to undertake the particular duty. In other words, a precondition of the children's welfare coverage being paid by Kody would include him acquiring full legal rights to the children. On the other hand, the children were being given a different explanation of the situation regarding their father, who did not wish to meet and handle them. While this is going on, there were also some private conflicts occurring regarding filming. According to reports, Preston was very much against the idea of his kids appearing on reality television. He did not want them to have to live their lives in the public eye and feared the repercussions of them being part of a polygamous family, the teasing and bullying they may endure. This is a critical tug-of-war scenario involving legal posturing, financial leverage, media storytelling, and a concern about children's safety and privacy, all occurring simultaneously. Now comes the part where it all tips. Preston was absolutely sure that the kids being on reality TV would do them some harm. Robyn, on the other hand, was thinking of the whole experience in a different light. She firmly believed that the whole experience the whole family was having, the travel and the money, would do the kids a whole lot of good. It would give them a much more comfortable lifestyle. In essence, she refused to even think about the possibility of the kids staying out of the cameras.
Consequently, at this juncture, there were two important points of conflict that needed to be addressed. These two involved Preston's dislike of taping his kids. Secondly, Preston and Kody disagreed over who should take care of the hospital expenses pertaining to Dayton's accident. Sooner or later, the impasse had to be resolved. The trade-off proposed was very straightforward. Kody would pay for the accident, supposedly committed when Dayton was under Kody's care, but Preston had to relinquish his parental rights. This came with some strings attached, though. Preston would be allowed to visit the child, and he had to persuade or rather command Robyn to desist from bad-mouthing him on primetime television. Again, recall that she had previously accused him of taking her purity and abusing her. The charge had been shown to be groundless. According to my sources, Preston agreed to this condition reluctantly. Why? Due to the imbalance involved. TLC was financing the story, funding the storylines, and providing Robyn with the opportunity to promote her side. Preston could not afford the fight legally and did not have a production company that could produce the storyline for him to recover costs for lawyers. In short, he had no choice but to either agree with the adoption as stipulated or go through with a probably costly and lengthy legal battle he couldn't have afforded to fight. Moreover, the real story of the divorce hardly matched what transpired on the small screen. To begin with, no recorded case of physical and/or domestic violence has been filed against Preston and vice versa. Here's the bottom line. The cause of divorce was cited as irreconcilable differences. There were no domestic violence allegations. Take that in for a second. If Robyn actually thought Preston was an abusive dad she could get access to, that would be the figuring head of this entire thing. But in none of these court filings, not even in the motion to suspended or otherwise terminated parental rights, is that anywhere to be found. As far as I have learned, all that Preston wanted was this: to have Robyn stop bad-mouthing him in public, blaming him for everything, and to be able to see his kids. That was their deal. The tragic thing about this, however, is that this guy has not had contact with the children in years, probably since 2016 or 2017. So I was told Robyn and Kody have made it possible for him to have had no contact with the children. They have got the children to think they have a bad daddy. Preston has children that have never known him. Preston's children now face health problems. Preston actually has a type of leukemia, and they never even know that.
This situation can be likened to the situation involving John Gosselin. There was a financial motive for the children being featured in the reality TV show. The custody of the children was fought by the producers so as to keep the storyline intact. Ultimately, custody was granted to Kate, pushing John aside. Both Robyn and Preston have the same thing happen. When two parents are at odds with each other about the filming of the show as well as the direction the program should take, the answer is just conveniently simple. One parent abdicates their rights. Why? Because the needs of the television network regarding the programming content, storylines, ratings, profits are easier met if one parent simply isn't there.
But it is a grim reminder of the manipulation that reality television programming can create, not only among public perception, but also among the lives and relationships that are built among those families featured on these programs. In the end, it basically boils down to control and manipulation. Preston was cornered. We'll pay the hospital bills, but only if you give us the kids. He would supposedly still visit the kids, but the promise wasn't entirely kept. It is clear through the text messages that Preston really did want to visit the kids, that he loved the kids, and that he was making the effort to keep the relationship alive. It is a very tragic case, and it becomes even more poignant considering the fact that Preston is now ill. The children have had no access to their father, and a relative of his told me that the children may not even fully comprehend what is going on. They may spend the rest of their lives in ignorance of the reality of the alienation which occurred. The level of estrangement is extreme, and it could take years for them to appreciate just how much they were deprived of their father. This is, unfortunately, a reality that many men similar to Preston find themselves in. Inequality, economics, and then the influence of media as well as networks like TLC work against these types of men. For Preston, it was not simply a struggle to gain custody, it was a struggle against a story being told on a national television outlet. And the case involving the accident at Dayton's is one illustration of this fact. Robyn introduced it as if it happened out of town, and somehow Preston was connected to it. But the truth is, he didn't lay eyes on his son until afterwards. Even the act of asking a father to be mindful of asking his kids about the accident began to be characterized as pressuring or cornering the kids. The image the world has of him is completely inaccurate. It's just so sad on every level. A father who adores his children, a public perception that is manipulated, children being raised with a perspective of what's happened that isn't what actually occurred. The human cost of this is far more than money or paperwork. It is relationships torn asunder and years of connection lost. He was not present. Preston was not present. The accident occurred in Las Vegas, which was an emergency situation, and Dayton was at a hospital in Las Vegas just after the occurrence. He was not out of town, and the reports on TV were misleading. This also raises a larger question of how else things have been misrepresented or distorted for the camera's sake. This manipulation not only affects the parents, but also the children, the image of the population, and the truth. I'd like to hear what you have to say about this. What do you think about all of this? Comments are waiting below. Take care, and goodbye for now.